Sometimes I feel like I want to fly without no wings. I elevate inside my mind. And sometimes
welcome everybody to the Sober Cold Bear podcast. My name is Matt Barkoff. I am the Sober Cold Bear, and joining me today for episode 7 is none other than Mr. Pete Kerns, President and CEO of Serenity Lane. Hi, Pete.
Hey, thank you for having me, Matt. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. And it's funny how we got connected, and you know, I felt like when we first when we met and we started talking, I feel like I'd known you for many years. So thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us.
Yeah, glad to.
Quick background on Pete. Pete Kerns in 2019 was named as the president and CEO of Serenity Lane. He brings 36 years of service to Serenity Lane. He's also the son of the founder, Dr. Tom Kerns. He also served 36 years in the Eugene Police Department, including 9 years as chief before stepping down in 2017. Pete's father, Dr. Thomas Kerns, along with Sam Graves, with the generous assistance of financial donors, founded Serenity Lane back in 1973, which when I was born, as a private nonprofit treatment center for alcohol and drug abuse. To date, the center has helped more than 70,000 people suffering from addictions and offers a local model to what I guess is a crowded rehabilitation industry, which I really want to dig into, Pete. Mm-hmm. Serenity Lane operates a beautiful, and I've been there, it's absolutely gorgeous. It's a 15-acre residential campus in Coburg, Oregon, and also has 7 outpatient offices around the state. And before I go to my quote, I just want to say to everybody that is viewing this, this is not a podcast about getting sober. This is a resource. This is here as a help to you. If you are looking for help, there's a lot of places to go, starting with your loved ones, your best friend, your spouse. You can call Serenity Lane. We'll talk about that. We'll offer resources to that. You can reach out to me on Instagram. And but really, this is not something that you can do alone. It is a very lonely disease, and I can speak from experience that it is very hard to try and do this alone and trying to convince yourself that you can do it alone, and you just can't. And so, we're here to help. Pete, I want to start with a quote. And again, thank you so much for joining. Your quote says, "While our past provides the foundation upon which we stand, it is the future we are building that provides me hope." Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit about your view and kind of Serenity Lane in your eyes. Let's start there.
Well, Serenity Lane is in a good place. My dad and Sam Graves started this treatment facility when really nothing was available in Oregon. And it was a cash pay business. Insurance didn't cover it. And both of them grew up knowing people who suffered severely from alcoholism, and our dad wanted to help them. And his life story is a pretty interesting one. If you like, we can circle back to that. But the fundamental constructs of what they created at that time some have stayed. The culture has stayed. So this is a warm and welcoming, non-judgmental environment. And when new people come into this, we recognize that it's a scary situation, and it's taken a great deal of courage for them to make that decision. And so we ensure that every single person that they encounter, including the other patients who are in treatment here, welcome them without judgment, warmly, and we're all here to help them achieve that lifelong sobriety that they're seeking.
That's well said. And I think, Pete, what's interesting is, whenever we go into, some type of recovery, whether it's like an AA meeting, especially kind of in the the newer side
Hmm.
of sobriety, there's always this like, what are people going to think about me? And, um, how am I being judged? And, I don't know if I can do this.
Hmm.
So what do you usually, because, and also, folks are scared when they first are going into sobriety. And I'm sure you have a lot of folks that, repeat,
Hmm.
coming there, but it's a scary thing trying to get sober and being uncomfortable in your own feelings.
Hmm.
So how do you guys make things so easy for folks to come in? What's some advice that you can offer, to those listening?
Well, the hard part is coming in. And then, once a person arrives, so much is lifted off of them. We know that when a person shows up here, they're racked with guilt and some self-loathing because they don't yet understand, although they will not long after they get here, but they don't yet understand that this is a disease of the brain that masquerades as a character flaw.
Yeah,
And
well said.
once a
Yeah.
person can come to understand that the brain has been rewired, and to a great extent, they've lost control of their ability to manage, their drinking or their drug use. Once they can understand that, they realize, okay, now that I know the mechanics of this, the chemistry of this, I can participate in changing what my brain has experienced and changing, and therefore change my behaviors.
Hmm.
Uh,
Do you
so
guys educate your patients on the chemistry of alcohol and drug use?
Yeah, it's a big part of what we do because not
Hmm.
understanding it is part of the problem. And the other people that we educate or we offer to educate are family members. So we have
Yeah.
family programming on the weekend, which is crucial because you know person who a household that has an alcoholic in it is in some form of equilibrium. It's not a healthy equilibrium, but there
Right.
is an equilibrium that exists there. You subtract the person with a substance use disorder and then return them to that family, now it's out of whack, the equilibrium that this unhealthy equilibrium it had achieved. It's like a mobile over a baby's crib. You take off one piece and it throws it out of balance. So we want the
Hmm.
family to come in on weekends, learn more about the disease of addiction, and then do some work with their family members so that when they come back, they can achieve that lifelong recovery together. And then we want people to continue in their treatment from residential to outpatient, which is why we have so many offices around the state, recognizing that 85% of those who who do someday relapse will relapse in that first year. So if we can keep a person in treatment and actively in sober communities in that first year, we know that their odds of success are far greater.
Now
And
I'm a
then,
I'm a chronic relapser. I
mhm.
first got sober, and as I told you, in 2021, and it took me 4 years to finally get through step one. And that is, finally just admitting that I'm powerless over alcohol and drugs and everything's completely unmanageable and I got to turn it over. What type of stats? Because obviously data is still, it's such a dichotomy out there, right, Pete? Because the data is still very new, even though there's reports that are coming out, like in January, the Surgeon General came out that it's like alcohol and drugs are now like the number 3 leading cause of cancer.
Yeah.
um what do you usually see in terms of you know what's success look like in the first year? Is it 10% that relapse? Is it do you guys keep track of that stuff, or do you just kind of do it on a case by case basis?
Yeah, keeping track of that kind of data is extremely difficult in this particular field. So nobody has good records of that. Nobody.
Mm,
But we belong to a national association of treatment providers who are endeavoring to track that. So we're learning more as time goes by. The National Institutes of Health have been trying to understand what the relapse rate is in the first year. Some of that depends on the substance that a person is addicted to. Opioids, relapse is much higher. About 70% of the people we treat have an alcohol use disorder, so we're very familiar with that. Alcohol use disorder, the relapse rate in the first year is somewhere greater than 50%.
Holy
Uh,
shit, really?
and a lot of that has to do with how you define relapse, you know.
Yeah, how do
If,
you
if
define relapse? I'm
Well,
curious.
that's, we define it by the necessity of a person to return to our care if they've left it, or
Okay.
if they're in our care, the necessity to return to a higher level of care. But, if it's defined by someone who's in a good recovery program in that first year and they're overconfident and they think they could have a glass of wine, and they go too far, and within a day or two they get themselves back on track. If that's a relapse, then it's pretty common.
So
If
that
a
so that
re
would maybe be more of like a lapse versus a relapse, Pete?
Yeah, I mean, there's no there's not a good vernacular around this whole area of what defines a relapse. But yeah, that lapse would definitely be a good way to describe it.
I mean, speaking from experience, being a chronic relapser,
Hmm.
and I think I mentioned this to you, I never looked at relapse as like a shameful exercise. I always learned something from, I can't
Yeah.
even speak. I always learned something from it, right?
Hmm.
There was always something. And of course, what usually causes relapse, right, isn't just, I want to have a drink. It's something that triggers you, something that happens
Hmm.
in your life, whether it's, a challenge with a family member, some struggle at work with your boss,
Hmm.
some trauma that you experience that causes you to have to take something to mask the pain, right?
Hmm.
um, it's really hard for addicts to admit that they need help, first of all, but b, it's really hard until you're actually like working a program to like sit in the feel. It
Hmm.
sucks. I mean, you talk to your patients all day long, I'm sure, and
Hmm.
you constantly hear this. So um, is that a big part of the program in terms of helping folks become comfortable being in their own skin, not just the the daily meetings and things like that? Because I'm curious kind of how the program works if you come in for like 30 days.
Yeah, that's a good question because a lot of people want to know what's it going to be like and how is this going to help me, change my life.
Right.
And so really what happens on our campus anyway, not everybody requires inpatient care who has a chronic substance use disorder. A lot of the people who call us, they have a condition that can be treated in our outpatient clinics, so they'll go there. But the most severe cases come here to our Coburg campus, where they'll first spend a number of days, 3 to 7 days, in our medically managed withdrawal unit.
Mm-hmm.
And while they're there, they'll see a mental health therapist every day. They'll see a licensed medical practitioner, physician's assistant, a nurse practitioner, psychiatric nurse practitioner,
Yeah.
medical doctor. They'll see somebody every day to help them with their medical condition. And they'll also be with a substance use disorder certified drug and alcohol counselor who will help them to start to recognize the nature of the condition that they've been suffering from. And when they're ready, and while still in the withdrawal management unit, they'll participate in group processes with other patients that will be transitioning to our long-term inpatient care here on the same campus. And they'll start to get a sense of what they're going to be exploring in themselves, the guilt and the shame that they're riddled with, but also what deeper mental health or trauma issues they've dealt with that they're going to be able to fully address when they get into the group. While they're in the hospital, as they're starting to feel better, we'll actually take them to that part of the campus where the primary groups meet. And every primary group has 8 clients in it and a counselor, and they meet together for the entire, with those people.
So it's like a pod
Yeah. Yep. We've got
concept.
counselor pods. Every counselor has their own office and their own group room. And a person that enters that group with that counselor, they stay with them the whole time they're here.
Do they all live together, Pete, or do they kind of come in and just get assigned to a particular area every time, or is it random?
Yeah, we have 5 housing units, but the housing is gender based.
Okay.
The groups are not. We have some gender specific groups, but only about 25 or 30% of the people here are women. And with people coming and going, it's hard to establish specific gender groups. Although we do have, outside of the primary groups, we do have opportunities for men and women to gather together with counselors.
Yeah.
So you're asking though, what can a person expect when they get into treatment? And what will happen is that through a series of assignments, most of the work is done. Most of the work is done outside the groups, but it's brought in and they process it together. But it's assignments that's going to get back to the very beginning of their condition, which for many people happened, when they were just little kids and before they'd had their first drink or had their first experience with some substance. They get all the way back to that, and they work through the relationships they've had, the emotions that they've carried, any behavioral health conditions or emotional health conditions they may have. They'll get to the bottom of all those in a very safe and supportive environment. And, when a person understands how their brain has been rewired by whatever substance they're addicted to, and when they can understand what the origins of their mental health conditions are that are substantially contributing to their drinking, once you know that, once I know why I have the relationships I have as an adult based on what happened to me as a child or what I experienced as a child, then there's something I can work on.
Right.
And I can, there's also a great deal of education with what I do with my life day in and day out as I leave here with this new information. So.
Yeah. And I think, for me, when we go in, when we start our meetings, there's obviously kind of a whole process. Are most of the meetings more kind of like a formal AA meeting type of format where you start with the Serenity Prayer and then you go through and do the AA preamble and the 12 steps? Or are there different formats based off of, different steps and processes? I would think there's a lot of different, like maybe one session where everybody has been kind of drawing, visions of their childhood, or maybe like a dream that they had recently, and they're coming in and they're talking about it. So it sounds like there's a lot of different structures that are basically put together to piece together, a 30-day program. Is that a fair way to kind of describe it?
It's, the way you started there was sort of an AA introduction. That is the way that Serenity Lane began. That was the structure we used at that time. And when I meet nonprofits like us around the country that started around the same time, we have very similar origins in that way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, AA as you probably know, is a fantastic approach.
It's
to
amazing
recovery. And I can get into why I think that is. But as time has gone by with Serenity Lane, we have remained, on the cutting edge of what the effective evidence-based practices are in the field. So there definitely is a theme of AA here, but the groups don't begin with the same AA experience that you've had. We will end them with the Serenity Prayer because there's so much value in that. But the exercises that folks in a primary process group are going through together, they're structured on the science that has evolved over the last 50 years.
That's phenomenal in terms of how you just described that. Thank you for doing that. Tell me a little bit about the Serenity Lane staff. How many folks? You'd mentioned there's kind of a kind of a center where folks can go. I just had a guy on the podcast, um, and his name is Rick, and he lives in Bali now. And at 24, he had been consuming 2 liters of vodka a day, and he was rushed to the hospital, going through seizures, and there was nothing that they could do to reverse those. So they induced a coma, and he was in a coma for 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
I would assume you get all different kind of flavors of that type, right? From extreme like that to, just somebody that's coming in and needs to, go through a real, deep process of getting sober and creating a path.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me a little bit about the staff and, how it's evolved over the years of, especially with kind of your leadership now, since you've now been in there for what, 8 years or so now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been here for 6 years.
Okay.
Yeah. We have, there's two things that are important to know about our staff. One is that the people who provide direct care, most of them, not all, but it's pretty close, are themselves either in recovery or they have someone close to them that's in recovery. So a person, who comes in here for treatment is going to be among empathetic people who get it and who
Absolutely.
who know that they are alive today. And I'm not exaggerating. They know they're alive today because someone else helped them get into recovery and sustain it. Nobody does that alone, right? So that's one aspect of our staff that's critically important to the whole character of the facility that we have here. The other is that we have a really high level of service here, which is to say that we have a medical director who's board certified in addiction medicine. We provide psychiatry. We have mental health therapists available to every patient, nursing, licensed medical practitioners, a spiritual advisor for our spiritual facility. We have a fitness facilitator who herself is a seasoned certified alcohol and drug counselor, helps people get on a plan for nutrition, plan
That's
for
awesome.
fitness, plan for emotional wellness through trauma-informed yoga and meditation.
Wow.
And then we have about 25 drug and alcohol counselors who are present all day and who also run groups. So there's a variety of responsibilities that they have. So that's the kind of staff that a person can expect here. And we have a high standard of integrity. So I don't have any concern that what's being done in the facility while I'm standing here talking to you meets the highest standards of quality throughout the whole organization.
That's amazing. So, as the CEO, obviously you wear a lot of hats, wear a lot of shoes, and even probably a multiple different pairs of socks every single day, right? How often are you going out? Because I mentioned to you I have a close friend that went to Serenity Lane, and you met with him. How often are you out meeting with patients, interacting with them? Because it's one thing to actually run a business, right? A very successful one, which clearly Serenity Lane is.
Mm-hmm.
It's another thing to have the human element to this, because this truly takes human beings and an empathetic approach to operations, right? So how often are you out there? How often is your staff out there? Do you just come in and, I would assume that you're not that type of guy that, just stands in your office and does stuff and talks to folks and calls and things like that. So kind of what does your day look like?
I come to work, and one of the first things I do is I walk through the whole facility and I talk to our housekeepers. I talk to the people in the business offices. I speak with the folks that are going to be answering the calls all day. I talk with our admissions counselor who are going to be welcoming the patients in.
Yep.
I walk through our withdrawal management unit and check in with the nurses and see how our patients are doing. We've got a beautiful environmental services facility where our maintenance staff, our facilities director, our dietary staff are all working. So I go through and check in with all of them, visit with them, and then I walk through the rest of the building, and I chat with the patients, the folks that are here when I can. And about once a week, I sit down with someone who's inpatient here for an hour because I want to hear their story and I want to hear what their experience has been like from their very first call with us to the time that I meet with them. Find out what we can do better, what we're doing that's working so that we're repeating our successes and we're working on the things that could be different. And about once every 5 or 6 weeks, I deliver a lecture on Friday afternoons to the people who are in treatment here.
Okay.
And the whole purpose of that lecture is to talk about service. As you know, that's a critical pillar component of
Yes, it is.
sustaining ones. So understanding what the nature is of a normal human being that gets in the way of us being of service to other people. That's my whole lecture is about that and what it could look like. And it's an opportunity to tell just a little bit of a story about my dad, whose life was just thoroughly committed to improving the condition of society.
That's amazing. So do you love your job?
Yeah, this is great. Yeah, I love it here. I love the the unrelenting sense of selfless service among the people who are here, and that's everybody. We have our chief financial officer, our HR director, the
Yeah, I got to meet
counselors, the
them.
doctors. Everybody is here because they love the mission. And I suppose we've had people who are here just because they want a job, but I haven't met any of them.
Yeah, I mean, look, service is everything to this program, and I even mentioned to you like before we started the podcast. I've had people that just randomly, listened to a previous episode and just reached out to me. And just said, "Hey, man, I'm looking for help," and this is a pay it forward program. Period. Full stop. I go to an early morning meeting every day, and I was waiting this morning to go into Starbucks to get my coffee because I get up early. I drive to Starbucks, I get my coffee, and then I go to my meeting that starts at 6:30, and I start early. I get there early so that I can greet everybody and say hi to folks that I know. But I was waiting for the door to open at Starbucks, and I was just like, man. There were like 4 or 5 of us, and this younger, looks over at me. She's like, "Yeah, we just need our coffee in the morning." I'm like, "Yes, we do." And in fact, I need my coffee because, I go to an AA meeting, and she looked at me and she's like, "Oh my God, my dad's been sober for 41 years.
Yes.
And,
right.
and I was like, really? I'm like, that's amazing. And she's young. And I'm like, so wait, when did he get sober? And she said, 21 years old. I said, wow. I'm like, so that means, you probably never saw your dad take a drink. And she's like, absolutely. She's like, my uncles, my cousins, my father, my dad, they're all in recovery. And, so this is a generational change that we're doing here. Yeah. It's not something that you're just doing for yourself. I got sober because I needed to do it for myself. That's where you start.
Mm-hmm.
But the impacts that you're doing, whether you realize it or not, is the impacts that you're doing on your family, your loved ones, your wife, your husband, your kids, your grandkids. They're able to see the best version of yourself, showing up. And, that's the beauty of this program. Once you can kind of get past the, I'm fucked up and there's just nothing that I can do to change that other than changing, how I handle difficult situations. But once you can do that, then it's a pay it forward approach.
Right. I'm so glad you mentioned this because I'm an outsider to sobriety. I've spent a lifetime, I grew up in a household with medical doctor, father who was board certified in addiction medicine, but his whole practice was family medicine. You know, he took care of families and did
Yeah.
this Serenity Lane thing on the side. But even with that background, even sitting around a dinner table as a kid, hearing him talk about how alcoholism is a disease of the brain, even then, you know, as a police officer, I would ask myself, why don't they just get their act together? You know, I mean, that's my level, and I think if with my background I thought that way, how would someone, you know, who has no idea, no understanding of this feel? That's why I think the stigma is so enduring, you know, despite all the public information that's gone out there, because all we see is this person who's just has these moral failures day after day, you know.
Yeah.
But I really like what you're saying about the value, the generational value of this. You know, I've met so many people who are long time in recovery, who, if they had not achieved sobriety and sustained their recovery, would not have been married, would not have met their wife or their spouse, would not have had children, and those children wouldn't have grown to be successful humans who themselves have children. I mean, and those children have children. I mean, the public policy value of helping you, Matt, get into achieve recovery and raise a family and have a profession and be in service to others
Yeah.
as you are every day. I mean, the long-term value of that is it's immeasurable.
Absolutely. I mean, you had an incredible story that I'll paraphrase. Actually, I'd like for you to share it. It's you'd mentioned there was, I think, a patient that came in and then ended up starting a business. Can you maybe elaborate on that?
Yeah, there's a guy that introduced himself to me via a letter, you know, on my first day here.
Okay.
And in the letter, he wrote that my dad was his doctor, and I've heard this same version of this story many times from other patients. And Dad told him, "Look, you got to stop drinking, or you're going to die.
Mm-hmm.
That is a route you're on. That's inevitable."
Sure.
And so, you know, this guy took his word for it. And his wife, I don't know if his wife had given him an ultimatum at that time, but he
That
was out of
usually
options.
happens. Yeah, that
Yeah,
usually happens one way or another.
yeah. So it could have in this case. I just don't honestly know.
Yeah.
And you know, he got into recovery. He drank hard, you know, and got into that weekend and got into treatment at the beginning of the next week. Got into recovery, grew his business, extremely successful, and acquired some wealth.
Yep.
Had a bunch of kids, and the next generation is several times larger than the number of children he had. It's just huge. And I mean, the nicest, most humble, you know, most capable, one of the nicest, most humble and capable people you'd ever want to meet.
Oh,
Wife
wow.
his spouse is smart and loving and strong. And it's been a real joy to get to know them a little bit. But yeah, I mean, that story, that's what's being repeated 100 times down the hall here in
Absolutely.
our facility.
Yeah, he had like 26, 27 grandchildren, something like
Yeah,
that.
it's a
That's just
remarkable
amazing.
number.
Yeah, but think about that, the paid forward aspect of this. Like we talked a little bit about kind of you come to a fork in the road, right? And that fork in the road can go in two directions. Take the right one, keep doing what you're doing,
Yeah.
and that road will eventually lead to probably nowhere,
Mm-hmm.
right? You'll lose your life, you'll lose your family, you'll lose your house, you'll lose your job or multiple jobs, you'll get a DUI, you'll kill somebody, or take the left side and rewrite your path
Mm-hmm.
in sobriety. And that's the power of this, right? And I didn't realize just how powerful this could be in the service aspect of this.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, like I said, I'm not doing this for any other reason than it's part of the service work that you need to do. You know, what comes out of this is I have no idea, but you know, it's amazing that I can speak to, you know, executives like yourself that are very busy and take an hour to spend time to talk about something that is just so important.
Well, Matt, somebody's going to listen to this. You know, you're doing a great thing because somebody's going to listen to this and think that could be me. You know,
Yeah.
I could be doing what I love and not be suffering day after day if I could just do something different. If I could just make a different decision.
Yes, absolutely. 100%. Well said. I want to take this kind of the last portion of our conversation, Pete, and I want to talk a little bit about what we talked about around corporations and businesses and
Mhm.
what we'd like to see them do a better job of doing. And my sponsor, who is very close and connected to Serenity Lane, I know there's a lot of advocacy out there and talking to corporations. It's ironic because in business is so focused on driving revenue and delivering value to customers and all this stuff. Yet then there's this kind of admission to, alcohol is just a part of the process, right?
Mhm.
And then a lot of folks get into trouble around that. And then in addition to that, companies spend a lot of money on healthcare solutions to help, their employees, battle cancer and diabetes and,
Mhm.
family trauma, medical and, mental. But when it comes to addiction, drugs and alcohol, which a lot of which comes because of a direct correlation to the workplace,
Mhm.
it almost becomes, an afterthought, I feel like. And I'm curious your point of view on this. We could probably spend another podcast just talking about this very topic, but I want to start diving into it a little bit and listen to your thoughts. And then we'll see where this goes from here.
Yeah, there's a couple of ways I like to talk about this. One is that we spend so much time in the workplace. It ought to be a wholesome environment for all of us to be in. It ought to be a place where we can all find fulfillment and meaning in our lives because we spend so much time doing it. And we want to know that we're in a place where we're respected and
And it's safe.
safe. Yeah.
Yeah.
And when I'm having difficulties, I want to know that I can count on the people next to me. So, I mean, to create that, really, an executive needs to be open to the possibility of assuming some responsibility for the wellness, creating an opportunity for people to have healthy lives. And the more an executive can adopt the components of providing wellness programs or wellness awareness to people, the more opportunity there will be to identify the diabetes when it's occurring, or the cancer when it's occurring, or the behavioral health condition either in the staff member or in their family,
Sure.
and of course substance use disorder. And when I was with the police department, we're preparing for natural disasters. We have to be good at responding to natural disasters because who else is going to do that?
Right.
And it's not like we're shipped out to a place where there's a natural disaster. It's happening in the community where I live.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to be very useful in helping my community if I'm worried about my family not surviving in our own home.
Right.
So that is a part of the planning that communities, that governments have to adopt. How are we going to care for our first responders' families so that they can focus on serving the rest of the community? And during the pandemic, we're in a child care crisis right now. It was even worse during the pandemic, and I know a surgeon who ran a private office who knew that he wasn't going to be able to take care of people unless the parents who worked for him knew that their children were cared for and being educated. So he provided for that so that he could serve his patients. Well, to me, this is like those two examples. The value of being open to recognizing when someone needs help with their substance use disorder, creating an avenue for them to seek that help, to recognize it and seek it, is in the long term going to be more beneficial to that executive, to that business than they can ever imagine. They get to retain the employee, retain all the value that that employee brings to the organization, but it's more than that. It's like your experience, Matt. If you had never been subjected to substance use disorder, you wouldn't be providing the service to people like you are right now.
Right.
You're a far better person, I think, than you could have possibly been if you have never been diagnosed or never had a substance use disorder. It's because of that and because of the work you've had to go through to achieve recovery that you're this spectacular human being that's serving so many people.
Mm.
That's true. That's true for everybody who gets into healthy recovery. They focus, it's necessary for one to focus every day on their integrity, their character, their
Yeah.
spirituality, their service to others.
Yeah.
And you do that day after day for a lifetime, a person becomes a pretty spectacular human being.
Yeah.
That's what that employer gets back.
I read a stat that said, annually, mental health and addiction costs companies upwards of $250 billion in lost revenues per year, or not more, if not more. And I think there's kind of two types of leaders, right? I shared this with you. There's the one leader that is empathetic, that understands, is willing to kind of lean in and say, I really think it's brave of you to tell me that you need help and you have a problem. I'm here to help you. And then there's the other leader, unfortunately, that I hear about way too often, that I would kind of describe as, a leader that regresses because they either are unable or uncomfortable to handle that situation. And so they choose to regress and take a different path, which, that's a whole different conversation. But I think it comes down to companies that need to do more. And I'm curious what you're asking companies to do, especially here in the state of Oregon. I think companies need to do more around education around addiction. Right. And there's two types of, folks that in terms of how they handle challenges, right? There's the one that leans in and says, I want to hear, I'm here to help you. The empathetic leader, I guess, is kind of the way I would describe it, right? The other is the regressed leader that says, I can't handle this. So it comes down to education and, helping folks kind of, take a human approach to handling people or handling, helping others, right? Employees. So what's kind of your thought on what corporations need to do better around that?
When you're responsible for an organization and its finances and the people who work there and doing things lawfully and being successful in whatever the mission of the organization is,
right?
That's a ton of work. And there are a lot of operational decisions that are made and strategic decisions that are made every day. And there's always a crisis, depending on the size and the nature of the company, there's always a crisis to deal with. Those things are pretty consuming, And when you think about when an executive is thinking about what other measures to put in place in order to improve their workforce, that's limited on the leadership, not just the executive, but the entire leadership team's capacity to do that, their finances to do that, all of that. I'm sure there probably are company leaders who just don't care, That's probably also true, but I think the vast majority of us would do more if we could, or if we had the mental space to do more. But the folks that recognize the value in this and invest their time and energy in it, they're going to reap, they're going to have long tenured employees working for them who recognize that they're working for a good organization. And when they or their family members, because our healthcare benefits provide for the entire family in most cases, they're going to know that they and their family are in good hands there. And if I'm setting up structures to help with a person's wellness, and that's not just sobriety, although that's obviously very important, but it's the emotional well-being, physical well-being, general wellness, nutrition, fitness. If I'm providing an opportunity for our staff to have that, then those are people that are going to want to stay here. And
Sure.
the pay, how much they're paid is secondary
That's
to
a
the environment.
byproduct. If you're in a good environment, that becomes a byproduct for sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So is Serenity Lane a part of, I would assume Serenity Lane talks to other Serenity Lanes across the country. You guys probably have, monthly calls that everybody gets on. What's usually a topic of conversation that you guys that's a concern that's on this subject, Pete? And, I would assume, there's a lot of probably government conversations you're having with the different government entities. What are you doing around that? And again, whatever you feel comfortable getting into or not.
Sure. Well, we talk about what effective treatment looks like. That's pretty important.
Yep.
So we have the association that I belong to invests in the research that we all need to understand how we can best use our time with the people that we're caring for so that they and their families have good outcomes, treatment outcomes. So a great deal of our time is spent around that.
Research.
Yeah.
So research of new approaches, or actually research on, drugs, or what type of research?
Research on the behavioral health approaches that are going to help a person succeed.
Got it. Got it.
What's the environment need to be like here so that a person engages in the treatment that they can have.
Yeah.
So those are the kinds of things. There's also, business discussions. How do we keep a nonprofit like this viable? And that's been valuable for me to understand what's normal across the country with similarly situated and similarly initiated places like Serenity Lane. There's some discussion about changes that the federal government has made since January.
Yeah.
We don't rely on federal grants to fund Serenity Lane. So most of the places that I'm associated with aren't in any danger because we're reimbursed by insurance companies or Medicaid or we have donors that support our.
Yeah. What does fundraising look like for Serenity Lane on a? Are you doing a majority of the fundraising? Are you talking to donors out there? I would assume you guys do events. What does that look like?
Yeah. When you come from law enforcement, you're not supposed to do any fundraising. That's frowned upon.
Really? I didn't know that.
Well, yeah, in law enforcement, police shouldn't be out there asking people for money. In the history of law enforcement in the United States, that's not considered to be a good thing. So it's a little foreign to me to be involved in that. But I speak with donors, people who, in most cases, they've got a really personal experience with recovery, and they want to help the organization that helped their child or their spouse or their father or what have you. And we have an annual fundraising gala. We're having our second annual gala coming up the end of May 31st. And
what's the date on that one?
It's Saturday, May 31st.
Okay.
We're having it right here on campus. We're going to transform our lecture hall into a nice dining area. It should be a lot of fun. Last year's was just super impressive.
How would one become a part of that? How would one does it need to be invite only? Do you have to go to a website? How does that work?
You just need to call us and we'll get you in there.
Okay. Yeah,
it'd be great to have you there, Matt, or anybody else that's interested.
I'd love to. I'd love to be a part of that. Absolutely. So, and as we talked about, I'd love to come and talk to to folks that are at Serenity Lane. I think that would be a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it'd be good. And then we do an annual appeal, keep people informed of what we're doing and where we're going and how their dollars can help us. And then we go to some family foundations and those types of granting organizations. We haven't spent that much time with the government because in Oregon, they primarily have supported Medicaid primary organizations, and we haven't fallen into that category.
Yeah. Well, I think your quote says it best. The future we are building provides me hope. And I just have to say, Pete, it's been an honor and a pleasure to meet you and become friends with you. And I'm so grateful of everything that you're doing at Serenity Lane. And I'm so appreciative that you were able to take in a person that you don't know and have a conversation with me and be so open and transparent. So thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
And, I hope that in the future we'll be able to have more of these conversations. Like I said, I created this as a part of my recovery story. Everybody has a different journey, and that's the beauty of this. There isn't no one way to do this. Now, there are tools out there that are proven, right? But there isn't no one way to do this. Just because I'm doing this doesn't necessarily mean it works for another. But as long as I can, as long as I can help one person that's seeing this, that's possibly saving somebody's life. And this is definitely a pay it forward disease. And but if you do put in the work, as the promises do say, then it will come back and help others. And that's the whole meaning of this. Parting words, Pete, before we go ahead and sign off.
Thanks for having me on. It's been a real joy to visit with you, Matt.
Thank you for being here, Pete. I appreciate you and all of the good work that you and your staff is doing at Serenity Lane. And just for folks, if you are having struggles or challenges and you are, in the, this isn't just for somebody in the state of Oregon. This, I know Serenity Lane takes patients from all over the country and the world. So if you have questions, go to serenitylane.org, just how it sounds, Serenity Lane, LANE.org. And you can find, all of the resources that you need. There's phone numbers on there. You can do a Google search. They're on Instagram. Reach out to me, please, the Sober Cold Bear. And I'm happy to put you in contact with somebody down there. But again, this, folks, this is a lonely disease, and you cannot do this alone. Yeah. And you have to ask for help, and it's okay to ask for help. I know for many of you that think you can beat this by yourself. Most don't. Got news for you. Most don't. And I certainly couldn't. It took me a long time to finally start doing it the better way and the more softer way. And now you're seeing, the output of that person now. So, Pete, again, thank you for your time. Thank you for your generosity and for leading such an incredible organization. And we're going to go ahead and sign off. I'm going to hit the stop button, but thanks everybody for listening to the Sober Cold Bear podcast. And Pete, thank you again.
You're welcome.
All right. See you later, everybody. Bye-bye.
Sometimes I feel like I want to fly without no wings. I elevate inside my mind, and sometimes I look inside